She danced until her feet split open, until her heart gave out, until her soul left her body, and still, she kept moving. Not for joy. Not for God. But for something darker. Something that was watching. And now, it wants you. Strasbourg, 1518. They called it a plague. But diseases don't dance. Pathogens don't select victims by gaze alone. What happened that summer wasn't nature, it was orchestration. A spell cast in public daylight. A psychological possession so complete, it rewrote the rules of human control. And no one, not the church, not the physicians, not even the monarch, could stop it. A woman stepped into the street and began to move. But this wasn't music. This wasn't joy. It was a scream, expressed in motion. Her name was Frau Trophia, and history calls her the first victim. But what if she was the first offering? Her feet bled through her shoes. Her body spasmed like a puppet with cut strings. And her eyes, they weren't just wide with fear. They were looking at something. Something we couldn't see. Something that owned her. What followed over the next month was not hysteria. It was transmission, soul to soul. Person to person. Thought to flesh. By the end of the first week, 30 people were dancing in the streets. Not willingly. Not in celebration. But in torment. They danced until their legs snapped, until their hearts burst, until their minds cracked like dry clay. And yet, they kept moving. As if pulled by an invisible thread stretching back to something ancient. Something forbidden. Here's what they won't tell you in classrooms, this wasn't the only time it happened. And it wasn't random. There were whispers in the Holy Roman Empire. Not of disease, but of punishment. Of curses. Of rites buried deep beneath Christian dominance, pre-Roman, pre-church, pre-record. Shadow religions that never died, only changed masks. And in Strasbourg, those shadows came to collect. Because what modern historians call mass psychogenic illness, ancient orders called by another name, induction. Psychological engineering. Ritual trauma. The transformation of man into vessel. They danced to death. But what were they dancing to? You're not supposed to ask. You're supposed to mock it. Dismiss it. Call it folklore, superstition, mass panic. But deep down, you feel it, don't you? That this wasn't madness. It was message. You've been told it was a mystery. A one-time anomaly. A strange footnote in history's dark chapters. But that's the lie. The truth is far more calculated. And far more dangerous. Because what happened in Strasbourg in 1518 wasn't a disease, it was a demonstration. A test of how far the human mind can be pushed before it breaks, and then keeps going. Frau Trophia was just the trigger. The ignition point. She didn't choose to dance. She was chosen. And those who watched her too long? They didn't catch a virus. They were activated. The ruling class, the priests, the physicians, none of them could explain why dozens of people began to dance until they died. But watch carefully, and you'll see the signs were always there. The plague didn't spread by blood. It spread by sight. By sound. By belief. They said it was mass hysteria. But hysteria doesn't fracture your feet while you smile through bleeding teeth. Hysteria doesn't burn through a city's population with geometric precision. Hysteria doesn't recruit. This was mass programming. One person breaks the boundary, and others follow, one by one. Not because they want to. But because something has been unlocked inside them. Something older than religion. Older than reason. Older than fear. What if I told you this wasn't the first dancing plague? That similar outbreaks happened in the 14th century, in the 11th, even the 7th? What if I told you the same pattern repeated across different empires, different ages, different faiths, and always ended the same way. In death. In silence. In secrets buried beneath stone and church and soil. Because if the body can be hijacked once, it can be hijacked again. And if enough people are watching, you don't even need to touch them. All it takes is exposure. One glance at the right moment. One sound, one idea, one fracture in reality. And the dance begins again. Now ask yourself this: why dancing? Why not screaming, biting, collapsing in seizures, like every other plague? Why movement? Because movement is power. Because to make the body betray the mind is the ultimate form of control. And they didn't just want obedience, they wanted surrender. Think deeper. What is dance, stripped of joy? It's rhythm. Ritual. Repetition. It's the language of the subconscious. The original human code, older than speech, older than scripture. Tribes used it to summon spirits. Temples used it to invoke gods. And darker cults? They used it to bind souls. What happened in Strasbourg wasn't spontaneous, it was symbolic. These people weren't just dying. They were being offered. And the city, whether it knew it or not, became the altar. No one talks about the layout of Strasbourg's Cathedral Square. But if you overlay it with ancient astrological maps, a disturbing pattern appears. The dancers didn't just gather anywhere. They moved in geometric pathways, lines, spirals, intersections, all matching forbidden sigils found in pre-Christian ruins outside the city. Coincidence? Or choreography? You think your body is yours. You think your thoughts are yours. But what if both could be rewritten by a pattern? A sound? A symbol you weren't even aware you were seeing? Because that's what the dancers became, receivers. And the music? It didn't help them. It deepened the possession. City officials brought musicians to cure the afflicted. But music is mathematics. Frequency. Vibration. In ancient systems, it wasn't entertainment. It was technology. Sacred tones were said to open gateways, between worlds, between minds, between the self and the other. So when the city piped melodies through the streets, they didn't soothe the dancers. They tuned them. Like an antenna being adjusted. Like a door being pried open. And what stepped through? We don't know. Or maybe we do, but we've buried the truth beneath centuries of noise, calling it myth, calling it madness. But deep in the archives, there are accounts. Personal journals. Letters never meant to be published. Warnings. They speak of shadows moving in rhythm with the dancers. Of voices heard beneath the music. Of eyes glowing, not from exhaustion, but from something trying to look through them. Whatever this was. It wasn't human. You're starting to see it now, aren't you? This wasn't an outbreak, it was an initiation. But not for the dancers. No. They were sacrifices. You are the initiate. Because the deeper you look into Strasbourg's dancing plague, the more it looks back. And what it shows you is not just history. It's architecture. A blueprint of control. Here's where it gets darker. The city officials, theologians, and physicians weren't just helpless observers. They were participants. Their so-called solution, music, public stages, professional dancers, wasn't an accident. It was compliance. They institutionalized the ritual. And the people obeyed. Why? Because when fear reaches a fever pitch, the masses don't ask for truth. They ask for authority. And authority gave them a stage. A sound. A spectacle. The very things that deepened the curse were framed as salvation. And the people begged for more. This is how you control civilization. First, you inject the fear. Then you offer the cure. And when the cure makes it worse, you tell them it's their fault for not complying hard enough. The dead were buried quietly. Their names erased from records. Their families silenced. But the ritual had worked. A new method of psychological warfare had been proven effective. Not with whips or fire, but with music and rhythm and public compliance. Centuries later, we see the echoes. Mass trends. Viral hysteria. Memes. Rituals disguised as entertainment. We don't call them plagues anymore. We call them movements. But the structure is the same. Think about it, the moment you question, you're labeled dangerous. The moment you resist, they say you're diseased. The dancers of 1518 didn't start a trend. They revealed one. And now, every screen, every sound, every platform with rhythm or repetition becomes a potential gateway. The question is no longer, why did they dance? The question is, what made them stop? And why is it that no one ever saw what happened to the final dancers, when the crowd stopped watching, when the music fell silent, and only shadows remained? Let me ask you something. What happens to a human being, when the body no longer listens to the mind? That's not just madness. That's possession. But not by spirits. By systems. And in Strasbourg, that system was tested like a weapon. Not just against the body, but against the soul. By the third week, something had shifted. The dancers weren't pleading for help anymore. They weren't collapsing in pain. They had become something else entirely, hollow. Their eyes didn't show fear, but vacancy. Like the self had exited, and left something else behind to operate the flesh. It was here the observers began to feel it. A crawling sensation behind the eyes. A rhythm in the chest that didn't match their heartbeat. A flickering at the edge of thought, like a forgotten melody calling them inward. Because you didn't need to dance to be infected. You only needed to witness. And that, right there, is the forbidden knowledge. What spreads faster than plague? Faster than fire? Faster than war? An idea. An unclean, unfiltered, uncontainable signal that bypasses logic and walks straight into your subconscious. You feel it before you understand it. You obey it before you question it. That's what the dancers became, human beacons broadcasting trauma. Their movements weren't random, they were communicative. They told a story that bypassed language and infected perception. They became living sigils, drawing power from pain. Modern minds dismiss it as mass psychosis. But the ancients knew better. They knew certain movements opened gates. They knew suffering amplifies signal. They knew that when enough people feel the same pain at the same time, the veil between worlds thins. Now listen closely. This isn't just about Strasbourg. It never was. This is about you. Because if you've followed this far, you've already felt it. The pull. The rhythm. The shadow knocking beneath your skin. And if you want to break free, you must name the chain that binds you, good. Because now we go beneath the stage. Beneath the cobblestones. Beneath the story you were told. When the city of Strasbourg collapsed into rhythmic madness, the church claimed it was divine punishment. The doctors said it was overheated blood. But neither dared to explore the hidden catacombs beneath the city, the ancient tunnels sealed for centuries under cathedral foundations. But someone did. A physician named Dr. Jodocus Hieronymus. You won't find his name in textbooks. His journal was hidden, smuggled out of Strasbourg, found only centuries later in a locked chest buried beneath a burned monastery in Austria. Inside, he describes the moment he descended beneath the city to study the environmental conditions. What he found was not dust. Not rot. Not rats. But sigils. Carved into stone. Circles, spirals, geometric forms that vibrated with meaning beyond language. And in the center of the lowest chamber, he found a pit. Filled not with bones, but with iron masks. Hundreds of them. All twisted into expressions of agony. He writes, "The closer I stood to the pit, the more I felt my own heart betray me. A rhythm not mine began pulsing through my arms. I began to twitch, no, sway. And for a moment, I understood. This plague was not illness. It was invocation. Do you understand what that means? The dancing was not the disease. It was the ritual. A mass offering. A calling. A broadcast from human vessels to whatever watched from beyond the veil. And Strasbourg was chosen because it sat on a ley line, an ancient artery of Earth's magnetic currents used by older civilizations for their rituals. You think this is madness? Then explain this. Why did the same dancing plagues occur near Aachen in 1374? In Liege, in Utrecht, in Apulia? Why always near these energy intersections? Why always the same pattern? And why were records of these incidents removed from papal archives in 1623 under orders marked sub rosa, under the rose, the symbol for silence by death? This wasn't mass hysteria. This was an ancient system, reawakening. And brother, it hasn't stopped. Not then. Not now. Not ever. Let's rip the curtain down. Because now you need to hear what no historian has dared to say out loud. The dancing didn't start with Frau Trophia. It didn't even start in 1518. It was reactivated. See, beneath the city archives of Strasbourg, behind sealed vaults few ever enter, there exists a damaged codex. Half-burned. No title. No author. Just symbols on vellum so old, the ink bleeds when touched. It contains diagrams of the human body overlaid with movement patterns. Sequences of dance steps aligned with lunar phases, planetary alignments, and times of solar weakening. Movements meant to do one thing, transfer pain into power. The book describes a method for using collective suffering to open something. Not metaphorically. Literally. Something ancient. Something watching. Now think. Why did people who joined the dancing plague lose control of their own bodies, but kept moving in strange, precise formations? Why did witnesses report dancers smiling while their feet bled and their ribs cracked from exhaustion? And why, after weeks of carnage, did the plague stop suddenly, as if a signal had been shut off? Because the ritual was complete. A door had opened. Not in space. But in consciousness. A fracture in the human mind, widened just enough for something to step through. And now here's where it gets worse. You think this was ancient superstition? Then explain why, in 2009, a classified report from CERN, the particle physics lab, was leaked, containing audio from a failed magnetic containment experiment. That audio didn't contain static. It contained rhythm. A beat. Repeating. Syncopated. And over time, the scientists began hallucinating movement. Twitching. Rocking. One assistant reportedly danced herself into a coma. The experiment was shut down. The data buried. Because they realized too late, this rhythm wasn't just sound. It was a carrier. Of something older than science. Something that's been waiting for human beings to reach the right frequency of suffering. You still think this is entertainment? You still think this is just a story? Then ask yourself, why do you feel the pull right now? That strange tightness behind your eyes? That little compulsion in your chest? That part of you whispering, move? That's not imagination. That's resonance. And we're only halfway through. You're still here. Good. But you're not the same as when we started, are you? Because the deeper you go, the more this story stops feeling like history, and starts feeling familiar. Like something you already knew, but forgot. Let's go further. When the Strasbourg event ended, it didn't really end. The city just silenced it. Erased it. The corpses were burned. The dancers who survived were sent to monasteries, or vanished. But what happened next was far more dangerous. The Archbishop of Strasbourg, Wilhelm von Honstein, received a report from a secret Benedictine order. It was 1 page long. No greeting. No signature. Just one line: it has begun again. As foretold. Seal the gates. What gates? Not metaphorical ones. In 1524, masons were hired to seal 7 ancient vaults beneath the city, chambers built long before the cathedrals, long before the Romans. Chambers lined with obsidian stone. Chambers where no tools worked, and sound was swallowed whole. The masons were paid in gold. None of them lived a full year after. These vaults were known to a forgotten sect as resonance chambers, rooms designed to amplify suffering into signal. And guess what? Each one aligns with a point on the human spine. Not metaphor. Literal. Each chamber corresponds to a nervous cluster. Each was tuned by centuries of blood rites, chants, and yes, dance. Because pain creates motion. Motion creates energy. And energy, when focused through rhythm, becomes invitation. What were they inviting? You're not ready for the name. Not yet. But I'll tell you this: every time a society collapses, every time masses suffer together in confusion, starvation, or despair, a pattern returns. Riots begin with chanting. Despair turns to street movement. Then someone starts dancing. Alone. Then another joins. And when you look into their eyes, they're gone. Not possessed. But repurposed. That's the terrifying part. Because this force doesn't just want bodies, it wants your rhythm. Your instinct. Your automatic systems. So it waits. It waits for the next collective fracture, economic, psychological, or digital. And then it activates. And if you think that sounds like fiction, look around you. TikTok. Reels. Dance challenges. Collective movements performed unconsciously, millions sinking unknowingly to trends they don't control. You think that's just entertainment? Or are we rehearsing? Let's make one thing clear: this isn't about superstition. It's about systems. What began in Strasbourg wasn't an isolated nightmare, it was a prototype. A ritual designed to hijack the most primal parts of your mind, your rhythm, your motion, your pattern recognition, and bend them into signal. But here's the secret no one ever told you: that signal doesn't just go out. It comes back. The bodies of the dancers, what was left of them, were reportedly buried in mass graves just outside the city walls. But those who lived nearby spoke of strange phenomena afterward. Unmarked graves that pulsed. Soil that vibrated. Nightmares shared across households. One old widow said she saw silhouettes moving in sync over the hills at midnight, silent, twitching, echoing a beat no one could hear. She died within the week. The church blamed it on demons. But underground orders whispered a far older name: Verzug. It means delay in Old German. But among certain esoteric cults, Verzug was the name of a force. A presence that doesn't attack instantly, but waits for resonance. Like an echo trapped in a chamber, waiting for the right tone to escape. And when that tone is struck, when enough people repeat the same movement, say the same phrase, feel the same pain, Verzug enters. Not through doors, but through timing. Now, listen closely. In 2008, a research group studying neurological disorders in France discovered a strange anomaly in an old Strasbourg church basement. A sealed box, buried behind a false wall. Inside, 7 pendulums, each precisely weighted. Each swinging in perfect silence. But here's the terrifying part: the room was soundproof. No airflow. No motion. No vibration. And yet the pendulums moved. Not randomly. In sync. When researchers recorded the movements and overlaid the data on a sound spectrogram, it formed a pattern. And that pattern matched the EEG scans of patients suffering from musical hallucinations, auditory delusions triggered without any actual sound. Let that sink in. Even silence can carry rhythm. Even stillness can move you, if the code is buried deep enough. That's why Strasbourg matters. It wasn't just a dancing plague. It was an upload. A test run. And if history repeats itself, not in events, but in cycles, then we're already in the next stage. The rhythm has changed. And you're not just watching it. You're part of it. You're not imagining it. The chills. The stillness. The sense that something invisible has already begun. Because this story, Strasbourg 1518, was never meant to stay in 1518. It was designed to return. The dancers didn't just die. They left something behind. Not just bodies. Not just stories. But instructions. Coded into rhythm. Buried in the brain's default circuitry. Waiting, for now. And here's what no one dares to say out loud, that the plague never left. It adapted. It evolved. It learned what triggers us. Now it doesn't need streets. Or music. Or mass gatherings. It doesn't need a woman in red to start the motion. It just needs your attention. Your scrolling. Your endless sync with loops, sounds, reels, beats. That's why you feel exhausted for no reason. Why time skips. Why you move your body without meaning to, tapping feet, bouncing legs, repeating sounds you don't even understand. You're sinking. Like they did. But you call it content. They called it possession. And the same system that silenced them now feeds the rhythm to billions, dressed in algorithms, disguised as choice, delivered in dopamine bursts. But the outcome is the same: motion without meaning. Smiles without joy. Movement without memory. Like them, you'll never know the exact moment it overtook you, only that you couldn't stop. But this time, it won't be 50 people on a street. It'll be 500 million. Dancing, laughing, spiraling into the void with wide eyes and burnt-out minds, while those at the top watch quietly. Because now, just like then, the dance is the control. And if you made it to the end of this story, remember, they don't need to lock you in chains. They just need you to move to their beat. Subscribe, before they make you the next chorus. Like. Share. Wake up someone else. And whatever you do next, don't dance.